The Exhibitors to the Public by Giacomo Balla, Umberto Boccioni, Carlo Cara, Luigi Russolo, and Gino Severini, February 1912. We may declare without boasting that the first exhibition of Italian Futurist painting, recently held in Paris and now brought to London, is the most important exhibition of Italian painting which has hitherto been offered to the judgment of Europe, for we are young and our art is violently revolutionary. What we have attempted and accomplished, while attracting around us a large number of skilful imitators and as many plagiarists without talent, has placed us at the head of the European movement in painting by a road different from, yet in a way parallel with that followed by the post-impressionists, synthesists, and cubists in France. Led by their masters Picasso, Braque, Derain, Metzinger, Lefauconnier, Lees, Leger, Lope, etc. While we admire the heroism of these painters of great worth, who have displayed a laudable contempt for artistic commercialism and a powerful hatred of academicism, we feel ourselves and we declare our art to be absolutely opposed to their art. They obstinately continue to paint objects motionless, frozen, and all the static aspects of nature. They worship the traditionalism of Poussin, of Ingres, of Corot, aging and petrifying their art with an obstinate attachment to the past, which to our eyes remains totally incomprehensible. We, on the contrary, with points of view pertaining essentially to the future, seek for a style of motion, a thing which has never been attempted before us. Far from resting upon the examples of the Greeks and the old masters, we constantly extol individual intuition. Our object is to determine completely new laws which may deliver painting from the wavering uncertainty in which it lingers. Our desire to give as far as possible to our pictures a solid construction can never bear us back to any tradition whatsoever. Of that we are firmly convinced. All the truths learnt in the schools or in the studios are abolished for us. Our hands are free enough and pure enough to start everything afresh. It is indisputable that several of the aesthetic declarations of our French comrades display a sort of masked academicism. Is it not indeed a return to the Academy to declare that the subject in painting is of perfectly insignificant value? We declare, on the contrary, that there can be no modern painting without the starting point of an absolutely modern sensation, and no one can contradict us when we state that painting and sensation are two inseparable words. If our pictures are futurist, it is because they are the result of absolutely futurist conceptions, ethical, aesthetic, political, and social. To paint from the posing model is an absurdity, an act of mental cowardice. Even if the model be translated upon the picture of linear, spherical, or cubic forms, to lend an allegorical significance to an ordinary nude figure, deriving the meaning of the picture from the objects held by the model, or from those which are arranged about him, is it our mind of evidence of a traditional and academic mentality? This method, very similar to that employed by the Greeks, by Raphael, by Titian, by Veronese, which necessarily displease us. While we repudiate Impressionism, we emphatically condemn the present reaction which, in order to kill Impressionism, brings back paintings to old academic forms. It is only possible to react against Impressionism by surpassing it. Nothing is more absurd than to fight it by adopting the pictorial laws which preceded it. The points of contact which the quest of style may have with the so-called classic art do not concern us. Others will seek and will no doubt discover these analogies, which in any case cannot be looked upon as a return to methods, conceptions, and values transmitted by classical painting. A few examples will illustrate our theory. We see no difference between one of those nude figures commonly called artistic and an anatomical plate. There is, on the other hand, an enormous difference between one of these nude figures and our futurist conception of the human body. Perspective such as it is understood by the majority of painters has for us the very same value which they lend to an engineer's design. The simultaneousness of states of mind in the work of art. That is the intoxicating aim of our art. Let us explain again by examples. In painting a person on a balcony seen from inside the room, we do not limit the scene to what the square frame of the window renders visible. but we try to render the sum total of visual sensations which the person on the balcony has expressed, the sun-bathed throng in the street, the double row of houses which stretch to right and left, the beflowered balconies, etc. This implies the simultaneousness of the ambient, and therefore the dislocation and dismemberment of objects, the scattering and fusion of details, free from accepted logic and independent from one another. In order to make the spectator live in the center of the picture, as we express it in our manifesto, the picture must be the synthesis of what one remembers and of what one sees. You must render the invisible, which stirs and lives beyond intertwining obstacles, what we have on the right, on the left, and behind us, not merely the small square of light artificially compressed, as it were, by the wings of stage. We have declared in our manifesto that we must be rendered as the dynamic sensation, that is to say, the particular rhythm of each object, its inclination, its movement, or to put it more exactly, its interior force. It is usual to consider the human being in its different aspects of motion or stillness, of joyous excitement or grave melancholy. What is overlooked is that all inanimate objects display by their lines calmness or frenzy, sadness or gaiety. These various tendencies lend to the lines of which they are formed a sense of character, of weighty stability, or of aerial lightness. Every object reveals by its lines how it would resolve itself were it to follow the tendencies of its force. The decomposition is not governed by fixed laws, but varies according to the characteristic personality of the object and the emotions of the onlooker. Furthermore, every object influences its neighbor, not by reflections of light, the foundations of impressionistic primitivism, but by a real competition of lines and by real conflicts of planes, following the emotional law which governs the picture, the foundation of futurist primitivism. With the desire to intensify the aesthetic emotions by blending, so to speak, the painted canvas with the soul of the spectator, we have declared that the latter must in future be placed in the center of the picture. We shall not be present at, but participate in the action. If we paint the phases of a riot, the crowd bustling with uplifted fists and the noisy onslaught of cavalry are translated upon the canvas in sheets of lines corresponding with all the conflicting forces, following the general law of violence of the picture. These forced lines must encircle and involve the spectator so that he will, in a manner, be forced to struggle himself with the persons in the picture. All objects, in accordance with what the painter Boccioni happily terms physical transcendentalism, tend to the infinite of their forced lines, the continuity of which is measured by our intuition. In these forced lines that we must draw in order to lead back the work of art to true painting, we interpret nature by rendering these objects upon the canvas as the beginnings of the prolongations of the rhythms impressed upon our sensibility by these very objects. After having, for instance, reproduced in a picture the right shoulder or the right ear of a figure, we deem it totally vain and useless to reproduce the left shoulder or the left ear. We do not draw sounds, but their vibrating intervals. We do not paint diseases, but their symptoms and their consequences. We may further explain our idea by a comparison drawn from the evolution of music. Not only have we radically abandoned the motif fully developed according to its determined and therefore artificial equilibrium, but we suddenly and purposely intersect each motif with one or more other motifs of which we never give the full development, but merely the initial, central, or final notes. As you see, there is with us not merely variety, but chaos and clashing of rhythms, totally opposed to one another, which we nevertheless assemble into a new harmony. We thus arrive at what we call the painting of states of mind. In this pictorial description of the various states of mind, of leave-taking, perpendicular lines undulating as it were worn out, clinging here and there to silhouettes of empty bodies, may well express languidness and discouragement. Confused and trepidating lines, either straight or curved, mingled with the outlined hurried gestures of people calling one another, will express a sensation of chaotic excitement. On the other hand, horizontal lines, fleeting, rapid, and jerky, brutally cutting into half-lost profiles of faces, or crumbling and rebounding fragments of landscape, will give the tumultuous feeling of the persons going away. It is practically impossible to express in words the essential values of painting. The public must also be convinced that in order to understand aesthetic sensations to which one is not accustomed, it is necessary to forget entirely one's intellectual culture, not in order to assimilate the work of art, but to deliver oneself up to its heart and soul. We are beginning a new epoch of painting. We are sure, henceforward, of realizing conceptions of the highest importance and the most unquestionable originality. Others will follow who, with equal daring and determination, will conquer those summits of which we can only catch a glimpse. That is why we have proclaimed ourselves to be the primitives of a completely renovated sensitiveness. In several of the pictures which we are presenting to the public, vibration and motion endlessly multiply each other. We have thus justified our famous statement regarding the running horse, which has not 4 legs but 20. One may remark also in our picture spots, lines, zones of color which do not correspond to any reality, but which, in accordance with law of our interior mathematics, musically prepare and enhance the emotion of the spectator. We thus create a sort of emotive ambience, seeking by intuition the affinities and the links which exist between the exterior concrete scene and the interior abstract emotion. Those lines, those spots, those zones of color, apparently illogical and meaningless, are the mysterious keys to our picture. We shall no doubt be taxed with an excessive desire to define and express in tangible form the subtleties which unite our abstract interior with our concrete exterior. Yet could we leave an unfettered liberty of understanding to the public, which always sees as it has been taught to see, through our eyes warped by routine, we go our way, destroying each day in ourselves and in our pictures the realistic forms and the obvious details which have served us to construct a bridge of understanding between ourselves and the public, in order that the crowd may enjoy our marvelous spiritual world, of which it is ignorant. We give it the material sensation of that world. We thus reply to the coarse and simplistic curiosity which surrounds us by the brutally realistic aspects of our primitivism. Conclusion. Our futurist painting embodies 3 new concepts of painting. 1. That which solves the question of volumes in a picture, as opposed to the liquefaction of objects favored by the vision of the Impressionists. That which leads us to translate objects according to the forced lines which distinguish them, and by which is obtained an absolutely new power of objective poetry. 3. That the natural consequence of the other 2, which would give the emotional ambience of a picture, the synthesis of the various abstract rhythms of the very object, from which there springs a fount of pictorial lyricism, hitherto unknown.